Welcome to Music Crush, a new music podcast hosted by Flute New Music Consortium. I'm Elizabeth Robinson.
And I'm Nicole Reiner. If you like the show, please rate and review it on the platforms wherever you listen to podcasts, particularly on Apple Podcasts. It really helps people find us and grow the show. And of course, you can learn more about Flute New Music Consortium at flutenewmusicconsortium.com.
So, Nicole.
Yes.
The last time I saw you was in mid to late May while I was at Colorado Mahlerfest, and you had just picked up a new reading. I don't want to say fixation, we'll call it a hobby. You just picked up a new interest online.
I think fixation is appropriate. Yeah. By the time this episode airs, I don't know where it will be, but right now it's May. Right now it's May while we're talking, because summer break is a wonderful time to sit around. Oh, we're not drinking any box wine. Bummer.
That's too early in the day on this particular day in May, but we can pretend that our respective water bottles are box wine.
Yeah. I've been reading with horror and like a car crash I can't look away from, Catherine Needleman's Facebook quite a bit.
For those of our listeners who are not familiar with Catherine Needleman at this particular point, can you give us an overview?
Well, she's, I don't remember how I first found out about her. She's an oboist. She's principal oboe in Baltimore. And when I first found out about her, it was her website. And on her website, of course, a lot of her Facebook stuff has also been recreated on her website. But on her website, what I first noticed was the way that she was systematically keeping records of how often major symphonies in this country perform music by women, employ women as conductors or even just guest conductors, and how often they hire female soloists to play with the orchestras. And it's beyond the big five, but I don't know, maybe 12 or something. I don't remember now, orchestras that she compares again and again. And then so that's what I knew about her first, was just this really valuable work making these graphs that give you a very clear visual that women are still struggling to get traction for their work in classical music, at least compared to men. And this is, it's a gender binary that she works in because she is a straight cis female. And I think, she has made comments about, recognizing that gender is, there are more than two genders in the world. But, she's focusing on women because that's her experience, and that I'm saying this as a caveat, for anybody who's listening and saying, well, what about, well, she talks about what she knows, which is being a woman and having been excluded in her life as a cis straight woman. The Facebook conversations have largely been her trying to call out really bad misogynist behavior, sexual predators, sexual assault stories in our field, and trying to, I guess, for lack of a better term, out those people, or the frustrating thing about these conversations is that they're already out. It's always like Whisper Network has had these people on their sites for years, but they're still working. And so she's trying to very, I think, publicly just humiliate and create a social bludgeon by which people who she deems worthy of punishment get punished. And I'm saying it that way on purpose, because sometimes it feels very just, and sometimes it feels a little squishy and questionable. So I think she just had a pretty big hand in seeing this French horn professor at Rice University to retirement.
So that's Catherine Needleman in a nutshell. What do you think has been so appealing to you about, I guess, this topic or this particular vein of justice in the classical music community?
I think appealing is probably too positive of a word. I think we all have, well, I shouldn't say this. For me, this is how you know this isn't scripted, because I'm stumbling all over the place. Good luck editing this one, Elizabeth.
polite and not say anything. Like I'm trying to leave Catherine Needleman in the dust in case that goes in a direction that you or I doesn't want to be affiliated with later.
Mm.
But I guess what about sexism in the classical music industry made her writing so appealing for you this past May?
I'm hovering around a pretty big landmark birthday. Very basic bitch of me, but I'm getting more nostalgic as I lead up to this even numbered birthday, and thinking a lot about all the unresolved issues, anecdotes, experiences that I have floating around in the cobwebs of my memory. Things I thought were icky at the time back in the 90s in college, but didn't feel like it was appropriate to say, that I need to just toughen up and deal with it. Or maybe times looking back when classmates were uncomfortable and I looked the other way.
I listen to a lot of other podcasts. I think I've mentioned to you that I really like You're Wrong About, but there's also a Wondery series where they'll do like a deep dive into the biography of some public figure. And I have been pleasantly surprised in some ways and shocked and appalled in others to find out what a horrible time the 90s were for women, particularly in the media. There were a number of public figures. Sinead O'Connor is one that I'm thinking of that just got dragged. And you think, you know, if that story had occurred in 2024, I have to think it would have gone down differently. How much of your sort of negative feeling, icky behavior, nostalgia parade do you attribute to the 90s just being kind of a weird time where we were doing better but not yet truly feminist?
I can't help but see social history as an evolution.
Sure.
And yeah, we were, yes, I think you hit the nail on the head. We were in a better place than, you know, people who get on Catherine's Facebook and share stories from the early 80s. But our students, I hope, are experiencing more freedom to speak out and defend themselves and call out bad behavior, and hopefully not being as subjected to as much of it as we were. The 90s were good for the 90s were better than what came previously, but things have continued to improve so much since then. And I guess there is that sense of just, I mean, you don't enjoy reading terrible story after terrible story after terrible story, but there is something to not being alone. And I want to say, I don't have really terrible stories personally. Certainly nothing to do with predation, and I feel extremely fortunate for that. But yeah, I guess I guess it's satisfying in the rare occasion that you actually see some justice being served, like with this, you know, now recently retired horn professor from Rice. We had our own big dramatic situation several years ago with a certain very well-known flutist who I had known about since the early 90s.
Sure.
But it was only because I happened to know some students from that school. Whisper Network, you know, and if you're not lucky enough to be tapped in, then God knows what'll happen to you, you know. So I knew about this person and avoided ever studying with him because I was lucky enough to know some people who were less lucky and had encountered him. And when that story finally broke wide open, kind of on the tail end of that Me Too year or two that we had, I couldn't get enough of it. I couldn't get enough of his public humiliation. I'm just petty like that. I was just so thrilled to see everything get taken away from him, especially considering the laundry list of horrors that comprised his 30-year career.
You know, it's funny that you talk about Whisper Networks because I think I had, I don't think I had an interaction with that person as a young person that felt weird, and I didn't feel good about walking away from it. And it wasn't until many years later, when reading the laundry list of things that could have happened easily had I been a different person or responded differently to something that made me uncomfortable, that I thought, oh, Jesus, to not be tapped into a whisper network is a very dangerous and vulnerable place to be as a woman
Yeah.
in any field.
I mean, obviously, you know, because these people will come up. I mean, William Prussell in the violin world, or, you know, whoever has had many allegations brought against them at this point. And it's like, well, obviously the Whisper Network is not effective enough, because young girl after young girl after young girl has these terrible stories, you know. So people kept walking into it. I mean, this person from our orbit, you know, people kept going to that school for 20, 25 years, not knowing what they were walking into.
Do you have feelings about the folks that call these predatory people colleagues? I met that person at a summer camp, and remember that it was in the early 2000s, and they were the sweatpants that had words across your rear end were
Oh, yeah.
popular.
The aughts were such a terrible time for women's fashion. I mean,
Well,
like,
I mean, yeah, like why are there words on your butt if you don't want people to read your butt? But also, why am I paying hundreds of dollars to be in this master class and watch you read words off the butts of people a quarter of your age?
yeah.
Was a thought that I remember having.
Mm.
And I don't remember what was said to me, but I remember that I responded with all of the patience characteristic of me, like, word on somebody's butt. And I was like, yeah, I guess if you're into that, and was blatantly disgusted, and spent the rest of the masterclass experience being ostracized. And like at the time I was like, oh well, I'm really not as good of a flutist as anyone else here. And my teacher at the time hadn't done anything to prepare me for this. So I was like embarrassing myself musically. Let's be clear. I should not have been where I was. I was not prepared to be doing what I was doing. And at the time I was like, okay, people are being gross and icky because I like have wasted their time and taken the spot from somebody who is more musically prepared to be here. And they put us all on a bus to go to dinner somewhere off campus. And there was another older man on faculty. And I'm like sitting in the front seat because at this point I don't have any friends and no one wants to talk to me because I'm a mess. And this older flutist sits down and says, you know, I notice you're not part of the crowd. And I remember saying something like, yeah, and it kind of sucks. And he observed that to be part of the crowd, you kind of had to be in the orbit and a fan person of the gentleman who had been reading butts.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yeah, maybe I should have been nicer about that. To which he responded, I don't know. I think you made the best choice. And like congratulated me for resisting it. But then got up and walked to the back of the bus and sat in a seat with the other guy.
Mm-hmm.
And they proceeded to share wine at dinner. And I was just like, on the one hand, I feel I have been praised. And on the other, what? The actual, sir.
Yeah, I have feelings. I have real strong feelings. Yes, it's inexcusable. And, you know, I don't know what it would be like to be young, brand new faculty. You know, you're in such danger when you are a new faculty member at a school. Although it's just a job. I mean, it's still at the end, it's just a job compared to like your humanity. So I don't know what it would feel like to be like a first year tenure track professor at a school and find out that a senior faculty member was highly inappropriate and needed to not be around students. That would be a difficult juggling act to decide what to do. I would like to think in that situation that I would absolutely be willing to risk getting fired for trying to protect students. But I don't know. So many times it turns out the people who knew are in a perfectly safe position, a perfectly stable, reliable position to go to the dean or the director or the department chair and say, this has been happening. What are we going to do about it? I'm going to continue to be difficult until you give me an answer and we do something.
Do we know that nobody did? I'm thinking to a previous place of employment where I definitely participated in a Title IX report. If anything happened, I never knew about it. I do know that things got very awkward between me and the person that was the subject of that Title IX report. I have been in the position of walking to the Title IX office with a student and not physically holding their hand, but, doing the emotional hand holding through a process. And the only change that I experienced was that my life was harder.
So do you regret it?
I do not for a second regret supporting the student, but I spent many uncomfortable afternoons and evenings crying that my life shouldn't be hard because I'd tried to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And even if the student had wildly misunderstood what had happened, it shouldn't, I don't know. It shouldn't.
Would you do it again?
Probably. I do not have a lot of self-preservation. I think it would be harder, I think, the second time, but at the end of the day, I don't sleep well if I don't feel like I'm walking the walk. So if a student came to me and said, like, ABC has happened, I'm a mandated reporter, I guess we're going to Title IX. Guess I'm gonna have a shitty month. I don't know. Have you ever had to choose between your own comfort and the quote unquote right thing?
Yeah, and I don't think I did a great job with it.
Oh no.
This was years ago. I was in a teaching situation with a colleague who was of higher rank than I.
Sure.
I think everyone was at that school. And there were all kinds of stories about him being real ick with students.
Sure.
And what I did to try to alleviate my very genuine concern about protecting my flute students was to try to find surreptitious language for checking in and making sure that they were okay. Is this situation, I mean, this was a person that a large percentage of the students in the department studied with in some regard. And, I felt like I had assurances that my students were okay. And I chalked that up to them being strong people or whatever, but that didn't cover all the other female students in the department. I was just teaching flute. And so I just made my little flute bubble and I was like, you guys all good? Okay. Don't be pressured into doing stuff you don't want to do, or don't feel like I tried to, make murmurs of advocacy kinds of language and like, please tell me if you ever need help, kinds of stuff. But I just kept it to the flute studio. And I had a couple of friends who were higher ranking in the department, and I would ask them, like, what's being done about this? Like, do you think this is true? And, there were various, kind of like, I'm steering my students away from this person, but in the end, this person who probably did some of that stuff was allowed to apply for another job and got it. And it wasn't that far away. And I remember confiding in the senior most female on the faculty at the time, who had with whom I had become kind of friendly, that, well, she had mentioned to me that he was in the running for this job and that she was one of his references. And I was like, how can you give him a good reference? And she was like, if it gets him away from our students, easily. And I said, but now you're just creating a whole new set of victims by sending them to another school. And she said, well, what's the alternative? What's your suggestion? And I was like, And so I just kind of sat on my hands. And he did eventually get out of the biz after that second job. I don't know why, if that school dealt with him more directly and more responsibly than we did, or what, but I feel like I should have done something more.
What would you have done?
I don't know if I would have gotten any traction going straight to the department chair, but I could have gone in and said, I'm really concerned about the safety of our female students.
Yeah.
What's being done to investigate what's actually happening.
It's tricky without a direct accusation. So many things about that feel so familiar. I want to be super clear that there are no whispers of inappropriate behavior on my current campus. And if anybody's doing anything icky, I don't know anything about it. But I frequently look at my colleague's office doors and all of the male names and think like if something did happen, how many of our female students feel like they have somebody that they can talk to. You know, we have a flute bubble, and I hope that my flute students at least know that I have their back, anything and everything. But you know, there are female students in other studios, and they don't necessarily have that same relationship with me. And like, how gross would it be to be, you know, a 19-year-old woman with a discomfort with a faculty member, and the person that you have to report it to is twice your age and a dude, and the person that they would report it to is, you know, old enough to be your grandfather and also a man. It just, it's hard.
Do you have any kind of program? Like we have this Green Dot program at UW, and it's a little short training. Well, I mean, I did it during the pandemic when they first rolled it out. I think it's based on Army training, actually, because the Army was having such massive problems with sexual assault and just sexism and misogyny. And so they have this whole program to like train everybody to be mandatory reporters, and you know, go through these regular workshops trying to sort of teach everybody why this behavior is wrong and why you should treat your colleagues with respect, basically. So we have a faculty version and a student version of this training at UW. And when you go through the training, they give you all this paraphernalia. Like I have a little, it's got the Cowboy Joe logo, you know, the guy on the bucking bronco that we use for everything. It's a sticker that's just a big green circle, and it's got Cowboy Joe in the center of it, you know, and I put that on my door. And that's supposed to signify to students who might not know me that I'm a safe person to report to.
If we have anything like that, I am not aware of it. We have a Title IX training that is more rigorous than Title IX trainings I've taken at previous institutions. But unless I have completely blanked out on some other training or program that I participated in as a new faculty, we do not have anything like that.
Yeah, and this is not mandatory training, so
Sure.
you know, it's, I don't know if that's great, but I mean, it's not a perfect system. You know, people have to choose to go through the training, and then you know, eventually, maybe somebody has to choose to knock on my door, a total stranger, because I have a green dot, and that student is feeling particularly desperate. Maybe to some people it would be nice to talk to a neutral person that doesn't know them. I don't know, but I'm sure for other people, it's just compounding the scaries to have to talk to somebody at all, and then for it to be someone you don't even know.
I don't think I would have had the wherewithal as an undergraduate student, at least. I think we've agreed that you and I were lucky and that there wasn't anything super, super, super overt. It was all that like gray area sexism where you're like, did that even happen? Or did I misinterpret a situation? Which is, I think, maddening and infuriating in its own way.
Like kind of just being alive. Unfortunately, I've been reading these conversations which have largely focused very much on like sexual assault and clear like inappropriate speech and behavior having to do with gender and usually with a huge age gap. And then a conversation started to turn into just a conversation about bullying, just about the ways in which teachers are very cruel to their students, nothing to do with their gender. I was reading some very articulate descriptions that people had of their time at this, that, or the other prestigious institution, studying with a teacher who was just mean. You know, didn't try to touch them inappropriately, nothing like that, didn't do that to anybody, but was just, you know, emotionally manipulative and cruel as a teaching tool. And the ways in which some of these people not only described their experiences, but then also described why they didn't say anything about it at the time, you know, that they thought, oh, I truly thought I was the worst player in the studio and that I deserved it. This is just what everybody goes through. I didn't want to be singled out as being too weak, thought I was being tested, and was I tough enough for this business or whatever. And that stuff really started to hit too close too
Yes.
close to home, because I've never been the target of a predator, or if I was, it was very brief and I was too clued out to notice, but I mean, I think people probably do put out little feelers and test and ask certain questions and decide how much leeway they're going to get.
Have you ever read Gavin de Becker's The Gift of Fear?
No.
It's basically a book that describes in graphic detail what you've just said. He takes it to extremes and deals with, people who are victims of sexual assaults and of crimes, but basically any situation where somebody is trying to pull something, they're gonna do little tests to see
Yeah.
where your boundaries are, and then to see what you will do if your boundaries are ignored or crossed. It's something that I think about a lot when talking about people who are inappropriate, whether it's with actual assault or whether it's with just emotional bullying. It's an interesting resource. You should check it out. I have found it helpful in my own life.
Yeah, I'll link it to the show notes too. That sounds very interesting. I know that when I hit campus at this particular school in this particular time in my life, I felt insecure from the start,
Sure.
which was silly. I got in and I got awarded, quite a bit of financial aid to be there, but I remember roaming the halls when I first got there and looking at all the really prestigious faculty names on the door and thinking, what am I doing here? And it must have just been like dripping off of me, that insecurity and that great hunger and that great need to get feedback that I was going to succeed. I think as a student, I was so obsessed with, man, if only I could look in a crystal ball and see if I'm doing the right things. And is this going to pan out for me? And so I'm sure I was very easy prey for this teacher who I learned a lot in the end, but I had to get some real distance from my actual lessons before I could separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. I mean, the actual pedagogy of how to play the instrument from just mind games. And the mind games, going through them, I suppose, made me much more conscious of how I frame things, what I say and how I say it, and how that's going to affect the person I'm trying to teach. I don't think I ever would have turned into a teacher who was so cruel. I cannot imagine my conscience allowing that. But it made me even more hyper aware of how you present information so that you aren't accidentally causing someone to crumble.
Do you think any of that was gendered or just a power differential?
I really don't, but I don't know. I don't think it was gendered. I think it was handed out pretty evenly, regardless of gender in the studio. I don't think that this particular teacher has a lot of male friendships, actually. I think this person has a lot of, from the outside, looks like, has a lot of female friends and is not particularly sexist.
I guess all of my teachers were female, so I can say without outing anyone, I feel like my cruelest teacher was absolutely a woman. I wonder, in that way, when you're processing things as you're very far removed from them, I wonder sometimes if they were working out some issues they might have had with other women. We've talked about this on the podcast before. It is so mind-boggling to me, the power differential that you have teacher to student, even in a normal, healthy relationship. And I think, like you, I am always alert to the possibility that I might say something in an offhanded way that lands very differently than the way that I intended it. And then you add, one-on-one interactions, the way that they happen in an applied lesson, and that somehow amplifies the power differential. But it seems like it must be a playground to someone with negative intentions who wants to work some stuff out on someone, because you have in front of you this person who has, who needs your expertise to be better, who wants your approval because they're human, and who has less power than you because they're the student and you're not.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking of all of the, the criteria and the sort of things to keep an eye out for that Gavin de Becker mentions in his book. And it's like, yeah, of course there's a lot of this going on in this particular setup because it's set up to be uneven, and that's sort of the gig.
I feel so privileged to be able to work one-on-one with my students. I mean, I just can't, of course, it's the only system I've ever known, but I can't imagine being as effective without that one-on-one apprenticeship that goes on for multiple years. But yeah, it does, if the wrong person gets to be in that position, then they can really do some serious damage. It's so great for those of us who are trying really hard not to do any serious damage, though.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Music Crush. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also support the podcast, read show notes, and learn more about FNMC by visiting www.flutenewmusicconsortium.com.